All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of XS Succeed. I'm here today with Faust, discussing season five's infamous Big Wiggly Man, Arakune. Faust, thank you so much for being on the show. Happy to have
Uh,
you.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm very excited to learn about this weirdo. Um, so, on this show, a couple disclaimers as always before we get started. We talk about playing to win here. And if you're not interested in playing to win, or if that doesn't sound fun to you, please play in the way that is fun to you. You'll play longer that way. You'll have more fun doing it. You'll wind up getting better in the long run if you just play for fun. And when we talk about playing to win, we're going to be talking about it from a pretty particular perspective, which is Faust's, informed opinion on how to play Arakune. He's an expert. I'm not an expert, but Exceed is a big enough game that there's room for a lot of experts with a lot of differing opinions. Um, so if you think that we've underrepresented some aspect of Arakune's kit, or if you think we're just flat out wrong, please let us know. This should be a discussion, not a prescriptive way to play this character. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the bookkeeping out of the way. Faust, I'm dying to know about. I don't even know where to start with this guy. I've read through his kit a couple times. I don't know what some of the words mean. I need your help.
All right. Well, he's a little bit of a mess. He's one of the more complex characters from season 5, in my opinion. Um, I think he's pretty good. I think he's just one of those that has the higher skill floor. I think it's called. Like
Sure, you need
it,
to
it takes
you
a
you have to be this good to pilot this character, kind of thing.
yeah, and you can pilot the character at a lower skill level too. It's just that it's a little bit harder to understand all of the moving parts that he has.
Okay.
But yes, so let's begin. So something I will point out beforehand, and this is kind of similar to the same thing that I mentioned with when we did Plague Knight,
Mhm.
is that when we go over some of his parts at the start, they're gonna look a little weird just because there's a lot of interactions that need to be stated later that make them make sense.
Okay.
So his ability might not exactly, come all together, and some of the card shapes and abilities also might be a little weird. But eventually, we'll get to the point where we can put them together with each other, and they'll make sense altogether.
Okay, great. That makes sense. In terms of his, like overall play style, is that also something that we should probably discover as we're going through the the kit, or can you say like briefly, like, is he a rushdown character? Is he a counterplay character? Or does he not really fit in those terms because of how odd he is?
Um, I would say that he's a very defensive character most of the time, but then you get a moment, like usually later to mid game, that you just become an unbelievably aggressive character. So he kind of flips between, not really wanting to strike unless he's going to win to wanting to strike every turn because he's going to win.
Okay.
Um, and you need to be able to play both styles to play him to the best. Um, so he doesn't really fit into any particular archetype per se. Um, a lot of the time he's doing set play and movement and defense, and then once he's succeeded, it's just every turn you want to make your opponent uncomfortable and throw cards at them.
Okay, that makes sense. And as we evaluate this kit, that's kind of the mindset that I'll try to approach it from. That we're
Uh,
waiting, we're waiting for our chance to strike. Cool. All right.
mhm. All right, well, let's go over his ability. The front side ability is pretty easy to understand. The back side is a little complicated, but
Okay.
so your exceed cost is reduced by 1 for each card in your overdrive. So he's one of the only characters. I think he actually is the only character that can put cards in his overdrive before he's exceeded.
Okay.
Have you gone over what overdrive is before?
Uh, in other season five videos we have, but for because it is a season specific mechanic that doesn't really have an analogy anywhere else. If you want to give a quick primer on it, that'd be great.
Okay. Do we have the reference card somewhere? Uh,
Maybe. Hold on a second. Let me see what I can do. Let me just spawn a
yeah.
Ragna. Hold on.
Should be
Uh,
in the reference. It should
it's
be in
yeah,
the
in
this.
references. 1 second. Season mechanics.
Um,
Here you go.
Alrighty. So Overdrive, for those who are unfamiliar or just want a reminder, is the Season 5 mechanic, where their exceed modes don't last forever. When you exceed, you put all the cards that you use to exceed, and only that amount, so although that is not necessarily true for Arakune, into your Overdrive, and then at the start of your turn, you remove one and take your Overdrive action, which is printed at the bottom of the card on the exceed mode. So
Which is
it
over
would
here.
be
Yep.
that little red box at the bottom there, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yep.
Um, then, at the start of your turn, after you removed a card from your overdrive, if your overdrive is empty, you deactivate your exceed mode and you flip back over. So you get a time limit for your exceed mode, which typically makes the exceed modes for season 5 either stronger or more specific because you only get so much of it.
Right. So if pretending that I'm not Arakune for a second, this
Yeah.
is a really weird costume for Ragna or something.
Mhm.
I've I've
Yeah.
got I've got 4 cards in my gauge. Ragna has an exceed cost of 4. I take I exceed, I flip over, I take these 4 cards and I put them into an area off of the side of the board called my overdrive area. At the beginning of my next turn, I do some kind of kicker when I exceed if it tells me to do some kind of kicker. On my next turn, at the very beginning of the turn, one of them gets discarded. I perform whatever effect it says on the overdrive area. I take my turn, taking whatever benefit I get, and that goes on and on until I've run out of cards in my area, and then
Yes.
I flip back over. Is that all correct?
That is correct.
Cool.
So theoretically, Arcane exceeds for 8. So you put 8 cards in your overdrive, and then if his exceed mode worked like a regular season 5, he would effectively have 7 turns of exceed mode because on the 8th turn you flip back over.
Right. Okay.
But he does not, which we will get to eventually. So yes, your exceed cost is reduced by 1 card for each card in your overdrive. Your specials and ultras have hit. You may add the top card of your discard pile to your overdrive. So you kind of double dip on your specials and ultras in that manner because let's say you hit and you put this card into your overdrive and this goes to your gauge.
Right.
So now your exceed cost is 7, but you have 1 card in your gauge, so it really only needs 6 more cards to exceed. So
Okay.
you can
So
kind of
so after 4 turns of having done that, I have 4 cards in my overdrive and 4 cards in my gauge. My exceed cost has gone down by 1 for each card in my overdrive, so my exceed cost is now 4.
that is correct.
I have enough gauge to exceed then, and all of that gauge gets added to the cards that are already in my overdrive, meaning that I have 8 cards in my overdrive area. If he worked like a regular character, that would mean I had 8 turns of exceed.
Correct.
Okay, cool. And I assume he does not.
He does not. He has some unique mechanics and stuff,
Okay.
which we'll get to. So then when he exceeds, he draws 2 cards and strikes, which is very nice and
Yep.
also helps his game plan a little bit. But then
Yep.
let's get to his exceed mode. This is the
Yep.
one that confuses people a lot.
Okay.
So the first time you strike, you reveal an attack, discard a card from your overdrive, which because it's discarding a card from your overdrive, you get to do your overdrive effect, which is at the bottom, which I'll get to in a minute.
Yep.
Then, if the discarded card's speed matches that of the revealed attack, and notably, the speed has to be the printed speed, it can't be its modified speed. So if
Okay.
you have light in play, it's whatever printed on the card, it's not +2.
Okay. So if you play at a spike, you're looking for a 3 speed card. You're not looking for the 5 speed that it effectively has from the light or something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So if the discarded card's speed matches that of the revealed card, -8 to 0 range, +2 power, and +1 speed.
Okay.
So that -8 to 0 range sometimes is confusing, but you can think of it like this: you can reduce your ranges as much as you want, but your maximum range stays the same.
So
Um,
so this card, without looking at any of the text on it, has a range of 4.
yes,
Now, it has a range of 1 to 4.
correct.
Okay.
Or technically, it could be 0 to 4
Okay.
because there is some situations where that could be relevant.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And same thing with this. This is now 0 to 3 instead of 2 to 3.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Neat.
But yeah, so and then plus two power and plus 1 speed is kind of self-explanatory. Just adds some stats to your card.
Right. And
Um,
that's a lot of stats.
yes, that is a lot of stats. It makes a lot of attacks a lot better.
Yeah.
And then overdrive. Look at the top card of your deck, and then you may seal it face down. And notably, unlike some of the other characters that seal things, if something is sealed with Arakune, you never get it back. It
Oh,
doesn't come back. It's gone forever.
okay. And a sealed area for people who are not familiar with that mechanic is just another kind of off board area that your cards go to. They don't get reshuffled when you reshuffle. You cannot interact with them anymore unless there's a specific thing in your kit that interacts with your sealed area. And for Arakune, it doesn't sound like there is.
There's not. Yes.
Okay.
So he effectively with that ability lets you filter what's on top of your deck, which is can be important, and I'll get to more of why that's important when we get to some of the more advanced stuff.
Okay.
But generally, you're going to try for his game plan to stand on your front. You stand on your front side and attempt to get enough gauge to exceed. And this is where you're most vulnerable, and a lot of your attacks are kind of awkward. And then once you exceed, a lot of your attacks become either unbeatable or nearly unbeatable, and you the chance to punch your opponent for beating you up most of the start of the game.
Gotcha. Okay. And just going back to the front side for a second here, I noticed that the hit effect, your specials and ultras have hit, you may add the top card of your discard pile to your overdrive. Is that does that may effect ever come up? Are there times when you wouldn't want to do that?
Yes, they're very rare. Typically, if the card on top of your discard is not the one you want in your overdrive, and with Arakune, a lot of your game plan is surviving, putting specific cards in your overdrive and your gauge, while attempting to make your opponent use resources to try and kill you. And
Okay.
so, a lot of the time, you'll just take whatever you can get because you need to get to your exceeds mode.
Right.
But sometimes, there are cards you don't want in there.
And,
Usually, if it's a speed 7, 6, 1, or 0.
and the reason that you would want the specific cards in your overdrive is that you, in order to get this effect at all, you need the matching speed.
Correct.
Okay. I gotcha.
And let me just go over this before we go over any attacks. I just want to take a look at their Arcane's attack speed.
Sure.
So we have a 2,
A two.
we have 2 threes,
Yep.
a 4, 2 fives, and a 7. So that means that with his exceed mode, the one that wants to match speeds, you don't have a 1, and you don't have a 6, and you don't have a 0.
Right.
Um, So if you get your cross, your focus, or your block, which are all cards that are easy to hit with into your gauge or your overdrive, you can't match them to any of your specials. So you have to match them to the other copy of
The other
the
copy
normal
of the
in the
normal.
deck.
Sure. And one of those is block, which is not going to get a huge amount of benefit out of that power or speed, or that range for that matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that would be kind of the case where you don't want to put them in, but a lot of the time you just want to get there, so it doesn't matter that they're not as useful to you.
Okay.
Um, It just matters that you get there. So that's like the rare case that you don't put it into your overdrive.
Okay. So when I exceed, I have, a total of 8 cards in my overdrive area, and I'm not seeing anything on this. Like I know that like Hakumen has a large gauge cost to exceed as well, but his overdrive effect kind of makes it tick down at double speed. Um, does Arakune actually have 8 turns worth of this ability?
No, so because you have to discard a card from it every time there's a strike, you're effectively probably going to get 3 or 4 turns out of it.
Oh, I see. So
Well,
it's not on the overdrive effect, but it's the first time each strike you reveal an attack, you discard a card. So you're passively bleeding it for your overdrive effect, but also you're actively using it for your strikes.
yeah.
Gotcha. I see.
So like the your opponent can force you to go out of your overdrive sooner by striking into you, albeit it's kind of hard to do that a lot of the time because R2 and his attacks become very strong.
Right.
Um, they can also just wait you out, and if they wait you out and you strike, you bleed your overdrive faster. So it's
Right.
never really going to be 8 turns. It's usually going to be like probably 3 to 6 depending on what you hit with.
That makes sense.
Because some of your attacks actually go to your overdrive, and you have boost that puts stuff in your overdrive too.
And so the fact that you have two ways to get cards, two things that move cards from your overdrive into your discard pile.
Hmm.
One of them, the overdrive effect, does not care what the printed speed is. So if I have a block
Yes.
in my gauge, I can still put it into my overdrive, and that still is good. I can
Yes.
just use that one as my overdrive trigger, and then use the spike that I also hit with earlier for the speed matching strike part of the exceed effect that I would actually want to use. So I can use both, but I'm only getting a benefit out of one.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's why you'll take spikes or crosses or grass or blocks, because you can use them for the 3 or 4 turns that you're overdriving from starting your turn, rather than using them for something else.
Okay. So have something matching the speed of the things that are in your hand, but other things that are going into your gauge are still useful to just keep the timer going.
Yeah.
Cool.
The
Okay.
one of the more complicated aspects of Arakune is deck tracking. From the player playing Arakune, and playing against him, it's kind of important to do that too, because let's say you fill up your overdrive with 5 speeds, and you have no more 5 speeds left in your deck. Well, it's not going to do anything for you. So you
Right.
have to be able to know, like, what cards do I have left, and if the cards that I have left are going to be able to match to things, because if they're not, then your Exemo doesn't really do anything.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the harder aspects. There's some tricks that I use as well to help with that for some of the players trying to learn him, which I'll go over.
Okay.
But yeah,
Well, no, that all makes sense. I mean, you're right that it is complicated, and it seems like from the effect that he's getting, this has to be like integral to his game plan. Like if he's going to win a game, it's probably through his exceed mode. Is that correct?
yes,
Okay. So despite it being complicated, it's also kind of his main line of play. So it's something that you sort of have to learn how to use.
yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
So um, let's go over his attacks and boosts, and then I'll go over kind of some of how his mechanics work together, and some of the thought processes of everything.
Okay. Sounds great.
All right. All right, we'll start down here. So Y2 dash. Also on a side note, which is just kind of humorous to me, most of Arakune's attack names and boost names are math terms, which is just kind of funny. So for any math nerds out there, you might get a kick out of that. Uh, but yeah, so it's a 2 to 3 4 4 before advance 2 or 3 if you move past the opponent +2 power. So if you want to think about this attack on your front side, it hits at 4, 5, and 1. Oh, I guess it
Okay.
hits at 6 too. 4, 5, 6, and 1. Um, and I guess 2. So it just doesn't hit 3.
Okay. And
Which
some of those things are like positioning dependent. If my opponent's in
yeah,
the corner or something, all that stuff is going to change a little bit because I'm not going to
yeah,
cross them up. But in like neutral board state, the one that you're missing is three.
yeah. It does the most damage at 1 and 2 because you're going over, and it hits for 6, which 4 speed, 6 power is pretty decent. It has no guard, so it's kind of like a mid speed that doesn't have any guard, but also requires your opponent not to be in the corner.
Right.
So that's all right. This attack doesn't really do a whole lot for you on your front side. It's usually used as a gap closer if you're going to use it, because it hits from 6 and puts you in at range 3, or hits at 5 and puts you at range 2 or 3. So it can be useful there. It's also got another kind of cool use case with its own boost, but really this attack is strong on his succeed side,
Mm.
because this attack goes from 4 speed, 4 power, 2 to 3 to being 5 speed that hits at range 3 that does 8 damage, which
Right.
is on curve and crushes everything.
Yeah, beats focus. So that's
Yeah,
that's an ultra, honestly, in
yeah.
terms of power. Right. Okay.
So it usually you're gonna want to save this card. But actually, most of the time you're gonna want to save most of his specials because there's only really two that are actually particularly useful on the front side. The other ones are have niche use cases, but like they're very good when they're succeeded. And for those not understanding why this is good at 3, when you're in your exceed mode and you can pay a 4, its range is now 1 to 3. So you can advance 3 and go to 1, and now it'll hit. And since you've gone over, you get the 2 power. And his exceed mode gives him 2 power for discarding the right card. So
Right.
4 to 6 to 8, and it's 5 speed because +1 speed.
Right. And it hits at range 1, which is where you wound
Yep.
up. Okay. So yeah, that is I mean,
Hmm.
that is potentially devastating.
Yep.
And on front side, like you called it a mid speed, but it's a mid speed that like doesn't actually, other than maybe by dodging focus in certain situations, it doesn't really beat too many slows.
Yeah, it'll generally be other 4 speed mid speed because
Okay. Right.
but like you need to see that on their card because there's no 4 speed mid speed other than Spike. So I guess it beats Spike and Dive at
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
At the ranges that you might be playing it. Okay. So
yeah.
and so you're right that's not overwhelmingly powerful on front side.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And then the boost is both players get +1 range and -1 power. So this is why I noted before that your attacks can go to 0 range because that's important with this boost. It doesn't really come up a lot, but that means that if you're standing at range 1 and you boost with this, any card that says one range, like a grasp, now hits at 2.
I'm not
Meaning
at
the
one.
only way to hit your opponent at range 1 is to have a card that moves back and hits, or moves over the opponent and hits, or has range 0.
Right.
So, in exceed mode, your attacks might have range 0. You actually have a range 0,
Right.
and you have Y2 dash and disjoint union that have effects that can make you hit at range 1.
Okay.
Um,
Even with this stipulation in place, so it could be
yeah,
more debilitating to your opponent because they probably don't have those things.
yeah, it's quite good at diffusing situations where you're stuck, because let's say you're playing against Ryu, right? So you boost this at range 1, and he doesn't have attack or attack hit or the one from season 7.
But
So he
Ukami, I
can't
think it's
play.
called Ukemi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He really can't do a whole lot to you at range 1 because, for Ryu specifically, he has one card that would hit you, because he has Tatsumaki.
Right.
Uh, but like most characters don't have a card that'll hit you anymore at range 1
Right.
because they don't have an attack shape that does that.
Right.
So you're completely safe from most options. You have 1, 2, 3 options in your kit that will hit them because of the way your attacks work, and you're passing it back to them. So you get to draw a card, you get to sit there. You threaten them because you have cards that hit them, and they basically have to take the option of, do I move? Do I boost? Do I just choose to lose the strike? Like they're in a bad situation, and it's not just like I'm gonna boost 2 speed, and then the opponent can also boost 2 speed or defend. Like they don't really have any options because their attacks physically don't hit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, other than Tatsu, Ryu can pump all the speed onto it that he wants, and he's still not he's still not beating this. So he needs to back up. He needs to do something else with his turn. And so for minimum and maximum range, so if you were to apply this boost to Cross, for example, Cross has a range of 1 to 2. It now becomes 2 to 3.
Correct.
Sweep now becomes 2 to 4. Stuff like that, right?
Hmm.
Okay. And and as you mentioned, uh, anything in most kits that have a range of 1 doesn't have a range of 0.
Yeah.
So they can't hit at range 1 ever. Um, Short of something like a before retreat 1 or something like that, or as you mentioned, Tatsu could get to here and then hit at range 2 or something.
Yep.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So it is
Um,
a really powerful debuff on your enemy.
Yeah, the trade-off is that Y2 dash is like an unbelievably good card in your exceed mode.
Right.
And if you boost with it, that means that one, you're not getting it into your overdrive unless you can get it in with your front side ability, which puts it in, um, or you're not hitting with it. on your exceed mode, which means you have one other copy. So it's a trade-off. It can definitely get you out of a good situation, but sometimes you want to hold on to it, especially if you already have a 4 speed in your gauge with it in your hand. Because then you basically have a card that says, at range 3, I'm going to deal 8 damage to you, and there's almost nothing you can do about it.
Right.
Um,
So, and if I'm so the front side ability here, you may add the top card of your discard pile to your overdrive. So I boost this at the end of whatever strike it occurs on, or if my opponent texts it or something, it goes to my discard pile. The
yeah,
next strike had better, I'd better be getting this into my gauge from the next strike before I put anything else on top of it if I want it. Right?
correct. Also, that wouldn't have to mean that you hit with your attack because your attack might be on top of it.
right. Oh, okay.
Or is it a boost or attack first? I forget. I think you discard boost first.
Well, so yeah, and if you hit with it, your attack would go to your gauge, so that's
Yeah,
okay. And if you whiff,
yeah,
you're not going to get it anyway. So that at least
yeah,
you're safe there. But um, in terms of you can't
yeah,
then spend if you want this in your gauge after having boosted it, you can't then spend the move action or change cards or anything like that where you're putting more
yeah.
like it's the top card of your discard pile for that
Mm,
reason.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And otherwise,
Um,
if you're trying to hit with Y2 dash in exceed mode, you need to play a dive or something.
yeah. You need to play a dive, or you need to cheat another card into your overdrive by like doing some nonsense, which I can get to
Got
for
it.
some of his other cards.
And it sounds like Y2 dash is important enough to do that nonsense for.
Yeah, Y2 dash and permutation on are like the two ones that are like the big hits most of the time.
Okay, cool.
But yeah. All right. So then, if he then Q. So this card is a little is very weird in his kit. This card is not meant to do damage on front side or exceed side. It's generally meant to either get you out of a bad situation or put you in a better situation.
Okay.
That's all this card is used for. And there are several speed traps in season 6. This one is both a little bit better and worse than them because it doesn't have a static number. Like a lot of them are like attacks with speed 5 or greater don't hit you. This one just says attacks with higher speed do not hit you. So if this attack speed is modified, then
Oh,
the
the dodge gets worse.
the dodge gets worse or better if your speed goes down. Which
Okay.
he has one way to do it, which is actually on this card. So you need to boost it with itself. But
Check.
yes. Uh, so this beats like grasp and cross by base or any really fast option, which is quite nice. The other thing is that it says before you may advance 3, it's a may. So if you can dodge out of the way by going first, like if you're at range 4 and your opponent plays dive, you'll go first, you'll move in, and then they'll go over you and not hit you.
Right.
So you have kind of an option select there. And then after, you may add this card to your overdrive. So you don't even need to hit with this, which it can hit. It does have a range. It just can't do damage because it has an NA,
Okay.
which is an important note because it can hit. You can trigger your frontside ability and put a card into your overdrive.
Okay. So this is potentially two cards in my overdrive. One of them is itself. Another one is the top card of the discard pile, and that could
Which
that would be from the force special or
so
the force
notably
cost on this card.
you get to pick what cards goes to your overdrive, which is important because you
Oh,
can discard the card with the speed you want to pay for it, and then it goes to your overdrive if you hit with it.
right. Okay. And
And
and the may you may add this to your overdrive means if I need it to for some reason I could put it in my gauge instead.
yes.
Okay.
Or if you just don't hit with it, like you have to dodge out of the way of a focus at range 1, you advance 3, you don't hit, it wouldn't go to your gauge, so you
You're
can
so
put it in your overdrive.
it's going to your overdrive anyway in that case,
Yeah,
and so is I'm sorry, no, but then you wouldn't be getting the thing that you paid the
correct.
force cost with
But
into
you
your
may not
overdrive
be
either.
taking damage, is the
Right,
thing. Like,
right,
it,
sure.
it's, yeah. Um, yeah, it's particularly good because you get to pick the card. The other thing is that because of the way Exceed works, when you set your attack and reveal it, you pay costs after you get to see your opponent's attack.
Right.
So if you flip it up and you realize that you can't hit your opponent because either you're going to get stunned or they're going to be out of the way, or some other thing where you don't want to move in and hit them, you can pay a card that you don't care about, like one of your crosses or a block or a focus, because then you know that card's not going to go to your overdrive, so you don't spend the one that you want to go to your overdrive.
I see. Okay, so you're committed to paying the cost. You're not talking about like invalidating the special after you've revealed it. You're just
Yeah,
saying what you're paying with is selectable after you see that it'll work.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is, and I assume that this is really never used in Exceed mode itself because it's not hitting uh
Uh,
for damage.
no, you actually do use it in your exceed mode, and the reason is because it refunds itself.
Oh, it
It
goes to
still
your
goes to your
overdrive. Oh, and you don't
yeah.
have any other way because you don't have your frontside character ability anymore. You're not getting
Mm.
more things in your overdrive, of course. So this just gives you another turn.
Yeah, and you can pick a card that doesn't match its speed, so its speed doesn't go up. You can use it to get in on your opponent. You can use it to dodge, and a fast option if your opponent does something into you. Um, you can use it to reposition yourself. It's got its uses in its exceed mode. It's definitely better, I would say, on its front side, but it's definitely not useless.
Okay, cool.
The other thing
Gotcha.
is that you can do with this, and this is kind of the more complex thing because you also do this with F of G or F inverse, is that his exceed mode is a little bit misleading. It says the first time you strike, you reveal an attack, discard a card from your overdrive. It's not the first time that you validate an attack. So let's say you wild swing into this. You can pay a 5 from your overdrive, invalidate it, and then the next card, regardless of if it's a 5 or not, still gets the bonus.
Oh, wild. Okay.
So, so if you have a 5 and there's no 5s left in your deck other than if P then Q, and you can tell it's on top of your deck because there are overdrives, look at the top card of your deck, you can purposely wild swing into it, invalidate it, and get the bonus on your next card.
That's so cool. Okay, so the overdrive effect, you look at the top card of your deck, and if you want to seal it, you can. And if
Mm.
you don't, it might be because you have, a card with a validation cost on it.
A
Next,
validation cost or other things, and like you can seal it if the card is useless to you. It's gone
right,
forever, but you don't really care if you're gonna kill your opponent.
right. You're hoping that the game's going to end pretty quick now that you're exceeded.
Yeah,
So you then next turn in this use case, you wild swing. You know it's if P then Q, or
yeah,
it's something with a gauge cost, and you say I'm not gonna take that cost.
yeah.
So
And
now you have a guaranteed 5, 7, or 3. And if you've got any of those in your overdrive, you have your exceed ability stats on whatever card you want
yeah.
to play. Got it.
And the thing is, if you can pay for it, you can always choose to play it. Let's say that like you're range 1 and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna not play my. You're thinking I'm gonna not play my if P then Q, and then just boost my like sweep
Right.
because I know I have a sweep in there or something like it. And then Ryu plays a Metsu Shoryuken, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna choose to play this instead, and the Metsu Shoryuken doesn't hit me.
Right.
And so you get the option select, and you don't have to pay that 5 cost card either once you see what your opponent plays. So you have a lot of moving parts to decide what your attack is going to look like, even before the strike happens, like before it's executed, because you can invalidate it, you can play it, you can boost the attack, you can not boost the attack, all after your opponent has revealed their card.
Interesting. So it's interesting that the complexity, I felt like going into this lesson, the complexity would be limiting. But a lot of the little weird little rules and edge cases are giving you more options about what you can do in your exceed mode, not keeping you from doing things.
Correct.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. So this is where it's a little harder for new players. Not necessarily because like it's hard to understand per se. A lot of these mechanics are simpler or just more are able to be explained pretty easily. It's just that like just this one attack has so many different possibilities that to play him to his fullest, you need to keep track of.
Right.
And just it's hard for people to do that, This thing has like 6 or 7 different possibilities on it, and it's just one card.
Yeah.
So like being able to track all of those together makes you a lot better player, but
Right.
it's definitely not easy. And even if you're a new player trying to play Arakune, unless you're particularly advanced at the game and have a very good memory, which I would applaud you if you do, you're probably not going to be able to put all these things together the first time. And
Right.
it took me a while myself to be able to figure out him to his full potential.
Right. And like nowhere on this card does it say you can invalidate this in order to get the stat bonuses on your exceed ability on another card. Like that comes from having read the text on this, having read the text on that, having understood the force cost. Even just
Yeah,
with this interaction, there's like three different sources of information you're pulling from to have a legible effect, not even necessarily an
yeah,
understandable one. So
the,
you're
yeah,
kind of there's kind of like a season fourness to it where
mhm,
you're pulling from a lot of different sources in order to understand what's going on with him.
exactly. The other
Got it.
thing that I guess I forgot to mention that again, as I said, there's a lot of things, so you might forget one, is that your overdrive happens before you validate. Um, so, for example, you play this, you reveal it, you don't necessarily want to play it. You go to overdrive. You're like, okay, I'm gonna add the stats. You discard a 5. Before you invalidate this card, you get to look at the top card of your deck and choose if you want to seal it or not. So if you look at
Right.
the top card of your deck and it's not good, you can seal it and wild swing into the next thing.
Right.
So like you get an option select on top of the option select.
Right.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, this all goes toward Arakune in Exceed mode is very, very, very scary because not only does he run you over with stats, he has a lot of different ways to confirm into those stats.
correct.
Okay.
But yeah, then the boost. This is probably the boost I've used the least on him. It can be useful. It's just very specific. -1 speed. Attacks at range of X do not hit you, where X is the number of cards in your overdrive. Now draw 1. So this is particularly useful when you're at the early part of the game. Usually, like when you have 1 card in your overdrive, because then it says attacks at range 1 don't hit you, draw 1.
Right.
-1 speed, which is pretty good. I mean, Cammy has that as an ultra boost, and like this is a special, albeit it gives you -1 speed
Right.
as more specific. So like, sure. If you're at the range that your opponent can like 2, and you play this with 2, it can also be useful, but it's not quite as useful because then they can just play like assault or something.
Right.
So
And there's not really any way that the number of cards in your overdrive is going to change while this card is out, right? Because you're largely building your overdrive while striking or through striking, which means that this boost would be discarded uh, before the number increases.
that's not necessarily true. It's generally true.
Okay.
You have a boost on your ultra that puts something into your overdrive. You have permutation NR that can put something into your overdrive. Funny enough, if you hit with a special before your opponent hits you back, the number of cards in your overdrive changes. If you play this card, the number of cards in your overdrive can change.
That's very true.
You have boosts. The hit draw 1 that adds this to your overdrive after add this to your overdrive. That
Right.
that can change the number of cards in your overdrive. So like
So
a lot of moving pieces.
before the end of the strike is over, you might not have the same number of cards anymore, so you might actually not be able to dodge your opponent's attack. Okay.
Yeah.
That I have a headache now. Okay, I got you though. And obviously
It
in your exceed mode, your overdrive is ticking down all the time, so it's actually go if you for some reason were to boost this in exceed mode, um
it's going to
the
change.
yeah, the range would decrement by 1 every turn or more. Uh
Yeah.
in the middle of the strike. Got it. That's complicated.
So yeah, like theoretically, you could have 1 card in your overdrive and boosted this, and then your opponent can't hit you, and they wild swing into a sweep, and then the number of cards in your overdrive changes, and now their sweep can hit you.
Right, yeah, okay. No, that sounds correct. So as you mentioned, it's specific and it's you haven't used it very often, and that isn't just because uh having a range dodge at a very specific range is tough to use. It's that also that there's many cases where it just doesn't work the way you think it will.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also the top part of the card is really really good.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you can do all those extra things with it that you would rather be doing than using a speed dodge or a range dodge.
Yeah, and that's not to say it's useless. Like I have played it before and it's been useful. It's just that like the situations where the bottom part is useful versus the situations where the top card is useful is a lot less.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. The other funny thing is that it's -1 speed, so you can play it with itself, and now it's a speed 4 dodge.
Instead
So
of
not
speed
only do
5
you,
dodge. Right.
yeah, so not only do you have a speed 4 dodge, or speed. They can't play at 5, 6, or 7 speed. But also now you have a range that they can't hit you at. So it makes it really awkward for your if you have both of them together, for your opponent to hit you at all.
Right.
Um, so that can be good. It's just like really, really situation dependent.
So far, having gone through two of his cards, other than the fact that I'm gonna need like a nap after this to rejuvenate, I'm noticing like the um both sides of this card, but especially the boost side of this card, is evasive and allows you to avoid damage and sort of play uh safely. And this
Yeah,
one is a dodge. Both sides of the cards are some kind of dodge and gives you your economic advantage. So to go back to what you were saying about the game plan really early in this lesson, on front side you're playing these things to get gauge and overdrive safely and not take too much damage.
yeah.
Okay.
And like that's sometimes that's not people's playstyle, and the fact that you have to switch from defensive to offensive when he exceeds is hard for a lot of people because he's both in a character, and
Yeah.
there's not a lot of characters that switch from one to the other. There are characters that can play both
Right.
at the same time, but there's not a lot that switch from one to the other. Season 5 does have a decent bit of them because of overdrive in general, but
Right.
yeah, it's definitely a different type of playstyle than most people are used to.
Right. It's interesting though that like all of these very complicated effects and moving parts and sort of tracking all of these things are leading toward a an overall game plan that doesn't seem like it is strategically hard to understand what Arakune wants to do. It seems like it's tactically very hard. Like what he wants to do overall is get into exceed mode and murder you.
Yeah,
Getting there is hard, and taking, uh optimizing the little tiny things you can do to get there faster and better seems very, very difficult. But like strategically, he does not seem as complicated as he does tactically. Is that accurate?
that's pretty accurate.
Cool.
When you
Okay.
when you play against Arakune, you know what he's trying to do. You just gotta like stop him, which is the harder part.
Right, sure. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So,
All right. So then Disjoint Union. This is one of the cards that's actually pretty damn good on front side, and it's better on flip side. But like a lot of the time, you're just gonna use this on front side
right.
because it does a lot. A range 4, which is the majority you can play it on opener. It's just an above curve option that uh, hits, and it's a special. So if you have a way to put a card in your discard, uh, then you can play this, and you get it and a gauge. And if your opponent is stunned, add the top card of your discard pile to your overdrive. So like, you can get up to 3 cards of this if you play it right. Um, because it's itself going to gauge. You hit with a special that goes to overdrive, and then if you stun your opponent, something else goes to overdrive.
Right.
So
And
it's like
and
a
so the the classic the sort of like tiger shot tension that Sagat has
yeah
of playing this on opening positions. You don't have anything in your discard pile.
yeah
And he can mitigate that to some extent by doing turn one reading or something that gets something into his
yeah.
discard pile. But
The
Arakune still, like, if you're trying to get 3 cards, you need 2 things in your discard pile.
the other problem with that is that with Sagat, he can read and play Tiger Shot, and that's fine
Right.
because he doesn't really care what cards are in his gauge. Argone doesn't really have anything to do if it focuses
With
in
a
his
focus.
gauge.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
and there's no other card that you play and does something and go to discard that lets you strike. There's cards that let you strike and do something, but they don't go to discard. And usually they put themselves into the overdrive.
Right.
So
So
like
would you be looking for an EX attack or something to use on first turn? Like how would you stack the discard?
a lot of the time you just don't play it first turn. You threaten it.
That
And
makes
since
sense.
most people don't have a speed 5 range 4, what I guess it's kind of funny. Most people actually have a speed 5 range 4 in season 7, so it's not quite as threatening. But uh you threaten it and you force your opponent to do something. Like you do something on your turn that's just like get cards in your discard, boost or something, whatever. And then you force your opponent to do something to get out of that bad situation. And it goes back to your turn.
Right.
Um the other thing is that this card has a second use, which is the first part. Before
Right.
range 1, push 3 or 4. So if we're here, you can play it. It pushes them out and hits them, and that's really good because it stops sweep from being a terror at range 1.
Yeah.
The other note is that you're like, okay, push 3 or 4. Why would you push 4? Because if you push 3, they're at range 4, and if I push 4, you can't hit them. Well, it's specifically to work with this boost.
Right.
Yeah, so you can boost with this at range 1. Your opponent really can't hit you, and then you can play Disjoint Union, push them out to 5, and hit them.
Gotcha. Okay. So, but and like even at pushing it to 3 is good enough to dodge sweep. So you don't need that
Yes.
particular combo in order to do that. But if you need to make more range, or if you need to,
Mhm.
if you're already trying to defuse them by doing this, you haven't screwed yourself out of playing Disjoint Union.
Correct.
Makes sense. Okay.
So it's useful at 4, it's useful at 1. It's good on front side. On the flip side, it's also decent because it turns into 1 to 4, and it's speed 6, which power 5, which is pretty good. It also still has the after if the opponent's stunned at a card. The top card you discard part of your overdrive, so it'll refund itself. It'll put the speed 5 back into your overdrive if you paid a speed 5 if you stun them on Exceed mode, so it's pretty useful there.
Right.
And a 1 to 4 speed 6 is pretty fast, so if they try and cross out of your nonsense, you can just stun them,
Right.
put the card back in your overdrive, and keep going.
I'm also noticing that for at range 1 it's effectively a mid speed. It's pushing out of range. If
Yeah,
you're using it as a mid speed, you're using it into something that has high enough guard that you're not going to be stunning it. So
probably.
if
Or
if
your
you're
opponent plays another mid speed or something,
right.
or yeah.
So but if you're using it to filter sweep or something, you're kind of accepting that you're not stunning your opponent, and therefore you're not getting the economic advantage of having another card in your overdrive. But dodging sweep is a good enough reason to play that anyway.
Yeah, and even then, you still get 2 cards. You get itself, and it's a special, so it gets another card in your overdrive because of your
Right.
frontside ability. So, like, you get 2 cards and you don't take 2/6 damage. I'd say that's pretty good.
Oh yeah, that seems just
Yeah.
fine to me. Okay. So
Uh,
but and then at range 4, when kind of the thresholds for guard are quite a bit lower and there's a lot of things that your opponent could be doing that are both slower than speed 5 and don't have enough guard to deal with this card, you can you can threaten to more consistently get that last bit of overdrive.
yeah, and even then, like, if your opponent has a guarded projectile, you still have a mix-up because you can play AP then Q. Um,
Oh, sure.
so so if they play the slow projectile and you play the AP then Q, you could duck under it, and if they play the 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 speed 4 or the speed 5 projectile, and you
Right.
play Disjoint Union, you stun them.
Right.
So,
Both of which would add the same number of cards to your overdrive, right?
Disjoint Union has the option to add 3, where if you think you can only add a maximum of 2.
Oh, right. The after for this one is itself. That's right. Okay.
Oh.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Cool. Okay. So either way,
yeah,
you're getting some kind of economic benefit out of it, but
yeah,
you have the mix up at range. Cool. All right.
yep. Um, yeah, and funny enough, both of them beat Sweep with 4, which is
Yep.
funny to say that they beat Sweep with 4, but they do.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and then the boost is just kind of useful. You have a bunch of speed 5s in your deck. You have Assault, Disjoint Union, and If then Q. And as we said, If then Q can be invalidated if it's on top. So having 5s in your overdrive is pretty good.
Right.
It's actually the one you have most of other than 3s. So the boost is now strike, hit, draw 1, and add this to your overdrive. So if you're just going to confirm a hit with something, like a sweep or grasp or cross, you can get the speed 5 in as well and draw a card,
Right.
which is useful. Um,
And it
it's
also seems like there's going to be a lot of game states where disjoint union the attack is not particularly valuable.
Yeah, if
So
they're in the corner, if they're sitting at 2 or 3,
right. Yeah. And I mean 2 and 3 are kind of the mix up ranges. So there's lots and lots of very threatening things that happen over here. So if they're not
Mm,
actively being threatened by disjoint union, it sounds like you just use the boost.
yeah.
All right, that makes sense.
But yeah, so then that's just union. And then probably my favorite card in his entire kit, Permutation NR. This card is really good and really cool, and the boost is phenomenal if you know how to use it right. So it only hits at 7, or well, it says it only hits at 7. So that means that if you wanted to play this card and just hit with it, normally you'd have to be here or
Right.
like here, but it says before spend up to minus 3 force for -2 range each. So this card on front side hits at 7, 5, 3, and 1,
Okay, so
which
so
means
odd numbered ranges only.
yes, odd numbered ranges only, which makes this card kind of hard to hit at on front side,
Right. Oh
but
yeah, on exceed side, it almost hits the whole board.
it hits 7 to 1. So the
Yeah.
only place that you're not going to hit them is if you're at the opposite ends of the board.
Right.
Um, and it does 7 at speed 4 with 6 armor and guard in exceed mode.
Yeah,
Um,
you're
so
doing fine.
yeah, it's one of the ones that you're usually just gonna beat your opponent, and there's really not anything they can do about it.
Right.
Um, so the hit is also really good. The opponent must discard a card at random. If they do, you add it to your overdrive. So not only are they down a card, but you get another card in your overdrive.
And
Which
it's their card, so that means that it
yes,
could have any speed that you want. So
yes, it
you
also
know, if you were saying like he doesn't have access to every speed value among his specials, but his opponent might.
yes. And the
Okay.
other thing that's funny is that you can if you can hold on to the card long enough, you can prevent them from reshuffling with it.
Reshuffling it.
So you can deny them that card for the rest of the game.
Okay. That's incredibly weird, but all right,
Uh huh.
that makes sense. And so you can't, it's a random card, but you'll take what you can get. And if
Yeah.
you happen to get Metsushori you can or something, you're feeling pretty good about yourself.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty good. Generally, you want to try and hit certain numbers, but like your opponent can't usually give you a bad one.
Right, sure.
Um, because you can use most cards, but yeah.
Yeah,
The
otherwise
other thing,
if you just need to use it to discard it for the timer instead, that's
yeah,
still more time on your timer.
the other thing to note is that let's say you're at range 1, unless your opponent plays cross or grasp, uh, they're probably going to stay at range 1.
Right?
So you can pretty much confirm with this if they're at range 1.
It's just expensive.
Well, sort of, because you get to pay 3 fourths, which means you get to pick the card that's on the top of your discard, meaning you get to pick what goes to your overdrive.
Oh, sure. Okay. So you're spending some stuff to hit with the card anyway, but you might want to be spending.
And then you get 3 cards because you get the card you pull from your opponent's hand, you get itself, and you get the card that you put on top of your discard.
Right. All right. So the so if you happen to be at this range then and you hit with this is actually a really 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 big economic advantage.
Yes,
Um
it's
a-
just
a-
kind of hard to do. Yeah.
sure. And so the really really big economic advantage is mitigated by having to spend some force to hit with it in like realistic game scenarios.
hmm
I
The
gotcha.
other thing is like you can force your opponent to get hit by this. Like if they're with range 7 and they don't have any dives left,
Right. They
they
assault in, they're still getting hit.
they can't cross out
Yep.
because they're gonna stay there. So like they're gonna get hit by it, and they can play assault to just get in closer, but they're gonna get hit.
Right.
Um,
I guess that also makes us a very strange cross catcher uh at some ranges.
yeah, if they're at 2 and you really think they're gonna play cross, you can play
Right.
this and they'll get hit by it.
Right. I mean
Um,
it's also it's 3 speed on offense with the guard of a the effective guard of a sweep means it's also uh at 3 pretty safe on spike.
yeah, I mean it breaks spike. So but it loses to dive. It does beat assault.
Right.
Um,
Right.
So like it's not terrible. It's just very and like the other things you don't have to pay the cards if you're not gonna hit. So
Right.
you spend the card and that's it. If you're not gonna hit, you don't have to pay the force. If you're they're at range, you can't hit them.
Right. Sure.
But the power of this card when you're in exceed mode is unbelievable. So if you're gonna use this card on your front side, you better be pretty sure you're gonna hit with it.
Right.
Because like 7 damage hits the whole board, gets another card into your overdrive. and break sweep is like game winning. If you can
Yeah,
have 2 speed 3s in your overdrive and both these in your hand, that's 14 damage that they can't avoid. And you
right.
didn't even use any of your overdrive pretty much. So
Yeah,
like
so that's an again, as we said with Y2 dash, that's an ultra.
yes,
Okay.
it is effectively an ultra.
Okay.
Um, and then again, you can change this to hit at even ranges if you want with Y2 dash, the boost. So like if you really need, if you want to like set up, they can't hit at even ranges or they can't hit at odd ranges, and
Right.
you can use
You
this.
you have something to do with those two
Yeah.
that synergize well. Okay.
hmm All right, and then the boost. So the boost is the opponent chooses, they add a card from their hand to your overdrive, or look at their hand and the top card of their deck. And this boost is very technical. So this is one of those things that generally, and again, it's kind of unfortunate in this manner, is better the worse your opponent is at the fundamentals and some of the more complex things of Exceed.
Right.
Because you're giving your opponent a choice. And generally, in a perfect world, your opponent is going to make the choice that's best for them. But they may not know what choice is best for them in
Sure.
some situations.
Sure.
Um, so it's effectively add a card from their hand to your overdrive. They could give you a block or a focus or a grasp or a cross, which are not particularly useful to you, but you get a free overdrive, and it gets it out of their hand, which those cards are decent. Like getting rid of a block or a focus can stop your opponent from playing them when you're in exceed mode. Getting rid of a cross or a grasp stops your opponent from having fast. So it's not that bad. And if they give you a card that you can use better, so a 3, 4, 5, um, or a 2, like then sure you get a free overdrive, and
Right.
that's useful. Like you didn't have to strike. You spent 2 cards and to basically get a free gauge, which I mean is not the best trade, but like you also pull the card out of your opponent's hand.
Right.
It also kind of keys you into that they don't want to show you their hand, which is the other part. If you look at your opponent's hand and the top card of their deck, and they don't change the number of cards in their hand or deck, um, like they strike into you, you know every single thing they can do to you.
Yeah.
Like, so you can play around it. The other thing is that if you have reading, which is unfocused, that says name and normal, and they don't get rid of the cards in their hand, you can read them and play something that's devastating.
Yep.
So, like, if they're at range 1 and you use this, um, and then they reveal it like a spike and they don't get rid of it, you can read the spike and play the other permutation NR. They can't hit you, and you hit them for 5 and get 3 gauge.
Yeah.
Or three gauge in overdrive.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and the funny thing is that like usually when your opponent looks at your hand, the best thing to do is change cards with your normals or get rid of them so they can't read you. Um, but that doesn't even work sometimes because if the top card of their deck is a normal
Is it
and they
normal?
change
They
and
just
they
draw it
change cards,
and you
yeah, they
read
just
that.
draw it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you can read
That's
that. So
that's pretty good.
like it's like just looking at their stuff is a big threat.
Yeah.
It often the opponent can't even just strike into you because they're going to risk losing more than they gain from striking you.
Right.
Um, so it's like usually you want to play this when your opponent has a big hand, and then they have to either give you a card for your overdrive, which is okay, or you get to do a bunch of technical nonsense to them, which is
Right.
reading. You know what they have in their hand. You know what's available. If they may have to take the chance to change cards, and that might not even work. And it's a lot of the time newer players, or at least in my experience, will be like, "I don't want to give you an overdrive. You can look at my cards,"
Right.
and it
And
sometimes it's worse.
yeah, definitely. And so they need to know how to diffuse that, but you are giving them the opportunity to diffuse it themselves. I guess the other problem is that no matter what they choose, it's costing you a copy of permutation NR that you could attack within your exceed mode.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem is that
Right.
you use the card.
Right. And this card is, as you said, part of your win condition on exceed mode, or
Yeah.
one of the ways that you can win on exceed mode.
Mhm.
Okay.
So like you know, um, again, we mentioned before that this is kind of playing to win.
Yep.
And if realistically you're playing to win and beat your opponent, if you can gauge that they're a they don't have as much knowledge about about your Arakune or just the game in general, boosting this sometimes is better than playing it in your exceed mode because
Right.
it will give you 3 gauge and win you a strike, which
Right.
means you're doing damage to them. You're getting closer to actually being able to kill them. Um, and sometimes even good players make the mistake or just like don't know how to deal with it or can't give you a card from their hand. Like sometimes there's just no good option.
Sure.
Generally, though, if you're playing against Arakune, you give him the card. That's
Right.
this. That's this card. You
Right.
give him a card and you accept it, and that's about it.
Right. And I mean, like, speaking of sort of playing into characters who are or playing into players who are maybe slightly less knowledgeable about it. There's knowledge about Exceed, and then there's knowledge about Arakune, right?
Exactly.
Like we are. I am explicitly doing this guide because I don't know what this character is doing at all. I would fall for this, right? And that doesn't have as much to do with my Exceed knowledge as it does for my being knowledge checked by Arakune. So
Mhm.
with a character this weird, it's very possible to catch your opponent with them not understanding something that you're doing.
Yeah. The good part about it is that usually when you get caught by it once, you don't get caught by it again.
Sure.
Because like it's devastating when it happens.
Right. So the better your opponent is, the more likely you are to use this as an attack on in your exceed mode. But if you are uh detecting that they don't know how to stop it, um the boost on this is a strong option as well.
Yes. Yeah. As unfortunate as that sounds, that is a lot of how this card works.
No, that's totally fair.
Um, and as I said, even then, there's some situations where, like, you have to give your opponent a card, and you just can't do it because, like, you either have very important cards in your hand, or you don't want to give them a certain speed or something, and you just
Right.
have to risk it. So,
Right.
like,
So
there's a point at which both options are bad.
yeah. So what happens if you um if you exceed the game's not over yet. You didn't kill the opponent. You flip back and then later on you reshuffle, having discarded some of their cards.
Their cards don't go to your discard; they go to their discard.
Okay,
You
that's
could,
all right.
yeah,
I would love to see a world where Arakune plays Metsu Shoryuken or something, but that's really good to know.
yeah,
Sorry, it goes back to their discard. Got it.
yeah. As a side note, there are certain zones that your opponent's cards can go to and can't go to. They can go to your boost area, they can go to your gauge, they can go to your overdrive. They cannot go to your discard, deck, or hand.
Gotcha. Okay, good to
I
know.
guess they can also go to your sealed area specifically for Bailcore, but that's besides the point.
Right.
Yeah. I guess also Yumina can do it, but that's yeah. So, yeah. So, good card. Game winning on front side can be devastating, or sorry, game winning on flip side can be devastating on front side if you know how to use it. Um, eh, I'll also go over that this is speed 3.
Yep.
Your other speed 3s are your Ultra and your Spike.
Yep.
Spike is not particularly an easy card to hit with generally.
Yep.
Your Ultra is also not a particularly easy card to hit with. This card is not easy to hit with. So generally, you have to cheat a speed 3 into your overdrive to be able to use this on your flip side.
And this is good enough that you want to be doing that.
Yes.
Okay.
And we've already noted several ways to cheat cards in your overdrive. Throwing
Right.
something on top of your discard and hitting with something. Um, you know, there's another method that's pretty easy to do, and we'll get to eventually, but
Right.
getting 2 speed 3s that are not this card in your overdrive and exceeding when there are both of these cards left in your deck is almost game winning as Arakune.
Okay. Gotcha.
It's just
And
very, very difficult to do.
so all of those times that we've talked about, add the top card of your discard pile to your gauge, add various things to your or to your overdrive rather. The thing that we're trying to get in there for this line of play is either F of G or Spike.
Yeah, and even
That
then, like
that's the target.
if you get permutation and R into the overdrive and you have another 3, you have 2 3s. Spike is really, really good with his exceed mode because it hits a 1 now. It's a 1 to 3,
Oh,
guard
sure.
4, speed 4, damage 7, ignore armor and guard.
Ignore armor guard. Sure.
It's
Okay. Yeah,
it's
that's
it's
devastating too.
it's quite good.
Okay.
So threes in general are just
Yeah,
strong.
get any three in there, and I mean, it also sounds like from Y2 dash. This is also an incredibly strong card in some cases in exceed mode, but our four is a little because dive is easier to confirm than spike sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Fours are both a little more and less useful because Y2 dash is very strong at 3. It's also good. It's also okay at 2, and it's okay at 1. At the longer ranges, it basically is it's a 3 to 6 power 6, which is okay. I mean, that's not bad, but like comparatively to other things, it's okay. And dive is then still a 3 or 4 power 7 speed 5, which is good, but
right,
like they're not unbeatable.
right.
Whereas the other ones are mostly unbeatable.
Okay. So prioritize threes over fours if you have the choice.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, remember to check what's left in your deck, because if you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna get all my threes in," and then you realize all of your threes are
You
gone,
you
it
you
doesn't do
you
anything for you.
you did too good a job, and every speed 3 card is in your overdrive now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you got to be careful of that. Same thing with fours. If you're like, "Oh, I'll use the fours this game," and then all your four speed fours are gone, and you have two speed fours in your overdrive, it doesn't do anything for you.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Then we have F piecewise. So we had permutation NR that hits at odd ranges. This is the one that hits at even ranges.
Right. Got it.
It hits a 0, which, as I said, is good with Y2 dash, but you can set up to 3 force for +2 range each, and it's a sweep. So it hits at 2, 4, 6, and then after advance or retreat 2, which means even if you're not going to hit with this card, you can tank through something and move, which is nice.
Right.
Um, and then in your exceed mode, which is one of the other things that's kind of unintuitive. You can increase this card's range and then decrease it with your exceed mode. So if your opponent's at 4 or your opponent's at 3, you can increase this card's range to
To
4,
4, and
and
then
then
it's 0 to 4 then.
yeah.
Right.
So it's 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 a little more expensive to hit with this thing because you actually have to pay cards on either side.
Right.
But it's an 8 speed 3 8 damage, which means it's gonna pretty much beat everything because it's got 6 guard
Right.
and it's speed 3, so it can't get spiked.
And sweep is not that difficult a card to hit a lot of the time. So there's a decent
Yeah,
chance that you have a and you want to hit with sweep too. So even on front side, there's a decent chance that you have a 2 speed card in your overdrive.
yeah. So this
Okay.
card is just pretty damn decent.
Okay.
You know, speed, and then on the flip side too, sweep is good with this. Like speed 3, 1 to 3, powers 8.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
so like hitting with some, yeah.
Notably good card.
Uh-huh. Um, yeah. It also lets you reposition on your exceed side. So like if you're at
Yep.
range 6 and you don't want to be range 6, you can hit them for 8 and move into range 4, and now all your other options are better.
Right. Sure.
All right, and then
I
another boost that's good.
I was just say I like that the card with 0 printed range is the card in Arakune's kit that passes for pretty simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a weirdo. All right, go ahead. Sorry for the interruption. Zero
No, it's
Vector, tell me
okay.
about it.
Yeah, so this is another one of the complicated boosts that gets better the better you are at the game.
Okay.
Name a card and strike. The card is invalid for both players. After add this to your overdrive. So you can use this just to get a 2 speed in your overdrive if you want, because
Right.
that's the boost of the overdrive. You could also use it to deny your opponent the one option that it's actually going to beat your crazy option.
Right.
If they have like a speed 5 ignore guard and you're gonna play permutation in R, you can say you can't play that, and then I'm gonna play permutation in R.
Right.
The other thing you can do with this is you can fake people out. So let's say you're a range 1 and you're like, hey, I know they have a sweep like in their kit, but I'm gonna say, hey, you can't play sweep, but and I can't play sweep. And they're like, well, if he doesn't want me to play sweep, I'll play my sweep like. And then you play disjoint union, and they play their sweep like and get blown out by disjoint union.
Right.
So you can kind of fake them out with it. It's also an after effect that adds it to your overdrive, so you don't even have to hit them. Um, you can just tell them they can't play a card and then play something that dodges your opponent and then get an overdrive.
Sure. And two in an overdrive, as mentioned, for sweep is pretty good.
Yep.
Okay.
Um, it lets you dodge like ultras. It lets you dodge above curve options. It lets you dodge things that are gonna do a lot of damage to you if you lose to them. Um,
Yeah,
it's
this seems. I see what you mean about it's better the better you are at the game. So first of all, you need to know what beats you at this position.
mm,
Then you need to know that what you're doing is valuable enough to spend the boost on it, and make your opponent play that card. Then you have to know what their play patterns are. Like you've got to there's a lot of fundamental knowledge that goes into playing that boost well.
you're also feeding them information because if you say, "Hey, I don't want you to play grasp at range one," you're
You're
like, "Okay,
also not
well,
playing grasp at range one,
you're not playing grasp at range one." But then you're like, they're like, "Okay, if they don't want me to play grasp at range one, what are they worried about losing to that grasp beats?"
right?
And they can figure out kind of what you might be playing. Just as a tip for people that want to use this boost effectively, one of the best options is to boost with this and name sweep, and then play if you think you
Okay,
because they can't play grasp, they can't play cross. If they cross out, you move in and hit them anyway because you advance three. They could play assault, but you would go first because you're speed five.
right,
They can't play dive. I
right,
mean, they can play dive and you won't hit them, but they won't hit you, and you'll get two overdrive anyway. They can't play spike. They can't play sweep because you told them they can't play sweep.
right,
And then they can't play focus. They can play focus, but you can advance three and dodge the focus.
right.
So you beat pretty much every normal that they can play if you do that. Albeit there are specials that can still beat you, but like it's effectively a I'm gonna diffuse the situation and get some overdrive if you do that. You get a
Okay.
5, you get a 2, you might get another one with the if then Q. So it really is just very efficient and
So,
quite strong.
I mean, what I'm noticing is that he has a lot of specific ranged cards and a lot of ways to really mess with his opponent specifically at range one.
Mhm.
Like between um irrationality for the bonus range, between his various ways to move out of range one, between uh playing zero vector for the combo that you just described. It seems like he's despite not having a lot of like really strong strikes at range one, it doesn't seem like it seems like he has a surprising number of like diffusal options there.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoy this character so much. I love set play, and I like messing with my opponent with boosts and weird strikes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And he just does it very well. And then not only that, but his cards that aren't great on his front side turn into real threats once you flip over. So
right,
your cards are like kind of like double sided, I guess. Like they have
right,
one thing they do on your front side, and then when you flip over, they become a completely different attack.
right.
So yeah, like he's got some very nasty setups. This is effectively free overdrive. It goes good with some other things. You can also use this with permutation and R. Remember how we said if they're out of dives, they can't beat this at range 7?
Right.
Well, you can
You
tell them
just
they can't play dive.
you're temporarily out of dives.
Yeah. The other funny thing is that if they wild swing into it, it's invalid, so they have to wild swing again.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they can't.
So
It's not that they can't set it. They can't play it. They can't. Uh, it cannot enter play as an attack.
and and here's the part that makes this card really cool. Most people look at this card and say, "Okay, I can stop my opponent from playing something," but you can also stop yourself
Stop
from playing
yourself from
something,
playing something. Oh my
which
god.
which is on purpose because let's say you have, you know, a speed your grasp on top of your deck,
Yeah.
and you have a speed 7 in your gauge, but you're at range 2. You can
Yeah.
say, I can't play the grasp. You play it.
Wild
It's
swing.
invalid. You
You've
get the
revealed it.
bonus from
You get
this,
the bonus.
and then you flip into something else that you can pick because you have the option select from your overdrive. And not only that, but then this goes to your overdrive again, and it just lets you do crazy nonsensical stuff that
The the people who are watching this video aren't going to be able to see it, so hopefully it comes through in my voice. So I just took my glasses off and just started rubbing my eyes. Like,
yeah.
oh my god. Okay, no, this character's cool. It's that's so, like I say this with affection, that's some nonsense.
It sure is.
I love it. That's so funny.
And it's
Intentionally make a card that you can invalidate so you could get your bonus on another god. All right, fine. Yeah, let's do it. That sounds great.
it's very rare that it comes up, but the fact that you have that option,
Right.
just, it has been very useful. And it also just says I'm gonna get a 2 in my gauge. I'm gonna get another thing. I
Yep.
can rearrange the top cards of my deck. All this stuff. It's just an extra tool in his kit that he can use to make your opponent explode.
Yeah. And a
Uh,
particularly funny way too, which is even better.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
The other thing you can do with it, which is funny, is you can invalidate a card from your hand instead of the top of your deck. So if you know the card is on top of your deck is what you want to play, and the card in your hand is the one that matches the speed, you can do
Right.
that.
And
So
I can't imagine a situation where you would know the top card of your deck.
mhm.
Although I mean, if you're in exceed mode, you probably want to be striking. Oh wait,
This
no,
is
never mind.
it is
Name a card.
striking.
Name a card, then strike. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah. So
exactly.
it
Uh-huh.
works. All right, cool, cool, cool.
Yeah. And you can use it with F inverse even if you have enough gauge because this card is cool. Uh, this card is almost never used as an attack, which is unfortunate, but it's interesting. 3 gauge, range 2, power 4, speed 7. So like that's okay. It's a DP. You
Yep.
know. The other thing it says is this card is invalid plus 3 armor,
Yeah.
and there's many situations where you would make this card invalid.
Yeah.
Probably the one that we just mentioned,
If you
and
wild
also
swung
if you
it,
wild swing it.
if
Yeah.
you did zero vector. So you're on zero vector. Name a card, then strike. But the card you name, unless you're in the mirror, which sounds horrifying,
Yeah.
uh, the card you name isn't in your opponent's deck. You just name F inverse and then play it, and you get 3 armor on whatever card you want.
Yeah, as long as you play F inverse, and you can play it from your hand and have enough gauge, and it will
Right.
still be in game, which is
Right.
important.
Right.
Yeah, the card, the thing that makes your opponent's brain explode is when you name it normal and then make the normal invalid because they're like, oh, they don't want me to play this card. No, it's not that I don't want you to play this card; it's that I don't want me to play
I
this
don't want
card.
me to play this card. Yeah, that sounds so much fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so F
Uh,
inverse, it's a DP. It gives you armor on something else, which can
yeah,
make some of your mid speeds safer or just make your
yeah.
trades better.
It does, and I've actually never ever hit with this card in Exceed mode. Um, but like theoretically, this is a range 1, speed 8, power 8 if you're in Exceed mode.
Yeah.
Because its range reduces to 1, if hit at range 1 plus 2 power, so that goes to 6, then you get the 2 power from your Exceed mode. So, seems pretty good, but like, most of the other things on this card are useful. It also has after push or pull 1 or 2, so it still beats sweep at 2 if you play it at 2, just regularly, because you can push or pull them out of the range.
Right.
It's also an after push or pull, so like, for some reason, if you validate this and you don't hit them, you can move them somewhere.
Right. But I mean the fact that you very rarely play it as an attack anyway, and if you are, it's a speed 7. It's a DP. They usually hit. That seems like a minimal concern.
Yeah, um, yeah. The real strength of this card is being able to invalidate it, or the boost that is wildly a little bit too much in his kit, in my opinion, at least, is forbidden knowledge, or what people like to call it, 5 forbidden knowledge.
Oh God.
Um, so it's 1 force. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Still one face down. Add 1 to your gauge. Add 1 to your overdrive, and return the rest in any order.
Right.
So an easy way to think about this is put 1 into your overdrive. Put one face down. Put 1 in your gauge. Put 1 in your hand, and put 1 back on top of your deck because that's the draw at the end of the turn.
Yeah.
So you put 1 in every zone basically,
Yep.
and this effectively means you're getting 2 towards your exceed mode, and you
One
get to
one
pick what they
engage.
are.
One engage. One in overdrive. You get to
Yeah.
choose. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you see those 3s or those 4s, you can
Yeah.
just be like, "That's going there. I don't have to hit with it. It's gone."
Yeah.
You also pay a force for this, so a lot of the time I'll pay my grasp or my cross for this because it goes underneath the boost. Like it goes to the discard, and then this card goes to the discard. So it's kind of buried down there, and your grasp and your cross is not going to be used that often.
Okay. And because the thing that the grasp would synergize with in the in exceed mode is this.
Yes.
and if you manage to hit with this, you're and it's going to your. I guess if you put it in your overdrive, having a boosted grasp is cool, but it's not gonna. You have better. You might have better things to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um. So
So
like,
so
yeah.
so forbidden knowledge seems incredible with everything else you've told me about what you can do and what like this seems like it just like gives you so many options to stack your overdrive in the way that you want to. How often are you setting up for the invalid play because of how good forbidden knowledge is?
Generally, if it happens, that's about it.
If you wild
Like
swung it like honestly instead of
you
with like
wild swung it honestly, you're already in exceed mode. You don't need any more gauge or overdrive. But like a lot of the time, what's going to happen is that you mulligan for this card, and you end up with like one or two of them, and you boost this next turn, you boost the other one, and then you're halfway to exceeding already.
right.
Um, yeah. The other thing to note is that with this card, you get to put one in your hand and one on top of your deck. You want to put the one on top of your deck that you want to play
Okay.
because you can just wild swing into it,
Right. Right.
whereas the other one stays in your hand.
It's kind of slightly in your hand, or
Yeah,
it's in play for a wild swing at least.
yeah.
Okay.
So like, you get a block and you see a block, you put that block back on top of your deck. Your opponent attacks you wild swing into the block.
Sure.
It's nice. It also means that you remove the top card of your deck again. So if you play the other one, now you're not seeing that card again.
Uh,
But yeah,
is this so? This seems like a pretty solid, maybe not like first turn play, but like an early gameplay when
oh, you play
you're.
this on turn one if you have it. That's
Oh,
it.
okay,
Like,
okay.
yeah,
I was trying to backpedal a little bit preemptively, but it is that good, and it
yeah,
like it's is that just because like as the game goes on, you're developing more ways to cultivate your overdrive, but this is just like, all right, turn one, I have no idea what's in the rest of my deck. Let's just start off with like a big tempo push.
yeah. That also, it's gotten to the point in generally with people who know to play how to play against Arakune that if they're going first, they parry this card that it's
Oh,
so threatening.
excellent. Yeah, excellent point. Okay.
Um, so like you play it as soon as you get it usually because
Okay.
if they can parry it, it's really really hard to come back from that tempo swing.
Right. Okay.
Albeit if you're playing against season 6, they don't have parry, so you don't have to worry about that. But
Yep.
yeah,
Now, I know that we're slightly ahead of ourselves here, but the one thing I knew about Arakune going into this is that uh the his astral is has a line of text on it that's probably going to be mentioned in a second here. Even with that as a threat, it's still a better idea to parry forbidden knowledge.
yes.
Okay.
And I'm gonna be honest with you. At least this is my opinion. This card is cool and it can be good, but it is a trap. Like
I kind of figured it was, unfortunately. I I thought maybe this seemed too good to be true, but yeah, so maybe forbidden knowledge is it's like it's less that like oh my god, parry forbidden knowledge even over end to infinity with end to infinity being so good. It's more parry forbidden knowledge because end to infinity isn't actually that threatening.
yeah, it's also just that End to Infinity needs 3 gauge and you need to reshuffle.
Right.
So you're not going to see it on turn one.
Right.
And if you get to the point where you're going to see it, you can probably just reshuffle and draw another block or
Right.
something, or like
Right.
hold a different one.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a threat on turn one where F inverse is, you know, a threat immediately because
Yeah.
it's 2 free gauge. It gets to filter their hand. It gets to filter their deck. It's just really 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 strong.
Yeah, I'm sorry for going out of order here, but
No, no,
do we want to talk about End to Infinity right now?
sure, sure, sure.
Because it despite it being a thing that instantly wins the game, um, it functions kind of just like a dive, right?
Yeah, well, if you actually want to play this card, you want to use it with your exceed mode because it now turns from a 154 into a 175 that closes 3,
Right.
which they need to play focus or block or they get stunned.
Or they die. Right.
Yes. Which, funny enough, um, there are characters that uh, can get stunned, but don't die when you hit them with this attack.
Oh, like
Um,
characters who have like your health cannot be reduced below 1 during the strike or
yeah,
something.
and there's also characters that say things like you can't take more than 4 damage during this attack.
Right.
So it's very specific, but theoretically you could stun them and not kill them.
And not kill them. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And
Um,
I'm assuming that like a lot of astrals, if you happen to get this, it's frequently just going to be you're going to use it as burst.
yeah, and I like this card a lot also just because true to the game, at least Blaze Blue as far as I'm aware, Astrals in Blaze Blue just kill your opponent
Yes.
in the actual game.
Yes, they do.
And this is the only Astral that actually just says your opponent dies.
Yeah, pretty much.
Um, you can't block it. I guess you could try, but you can't block it. Um, and yeah, actually, theoretically, Devris could block this card if he sets up enough, but that's about it.
Right. Well, so actually though, the block how does that work though? Because like if you play block into this, you're you're not stunning them,
Oh
so
yeah,
you do less damage. That's odd.
yeah. I guess actually that wouldn't work. Yeah, they if they block it, they probably just don't get stunned. But
Okay.
I was thinking about that too hard
Yeah,
because
that
you have to do it on hit effects and the after effect deals the damage.
right.
Yeah, that
It's
wouldn't work.
the after effect is what kills you. Okay.
Yeah.
That is good to know though. So all
Mm,
right, so this is maybe slightly better than a meme card. It might actually be threatening in some matchups if you happen to
yeah.
be in a situation where you can play it, but you probably have better things to do.
If you do want to go for this line, and it's enjoyable, it's probably not the most optimal thing. The best thing you can do to like get this line to work
Yeah,
is to use the boost on permutation and R to look at a card in their hand, use parry to look at a card in their hand, and then read a normal and make them play like grasp at range 2 and then hit them with this.
sure.
And that can work. Like it's actually a real threat to, like for a turn or two. If you're looking at your opponent's hand with a reading or parry or A plus or minus B, and you have this in your hand, your opponent really has to think, am I going to risk instantly losing this game because I'm going to get red and hit with this instead?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's at least something that will have to give them pause and make them, like it's like you can you can play around this, but you'll be
mhm,
playing around it in a way that Arakune could take advantage of.
yeah,
Okay.
and while the card says if I stun you, I win, the boost is generally better. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
draw 2 cards, take another
Take another
action.
action. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Mhm.
Okay.
Uh, yeah. Also, funny enough, if this does go to your gauge, the speed 4, it doesn't seal itself, which like some of the other astrals do.
Right.
So you can put it in your gauge or your overdrive if you discard it to something, and then use it for your exceed mode.
Oh, sure. And then now you have one more way, I guess.
Yeah,
You burst with this.
yeah,
You combo into Y2 dash, and you're feeling pretty good about the 8 damage you just did.
yeah. It's like a 99 damage versus 8 damage, but
Right.
realistically, that like they parry it, and then you put it in your overdrive.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Again, unfortunately, more of a meme, but it does have its uses. It's not useless, like a
Yep.
lot of astrals typically are.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
And then finally, we have F of G.
this card is a little weird. It's very good, but it's also very bad at the same time, and
Okay.
it really depends on if you can use this card. This card can win you an entire game just by hitting it on your front side, but it's pretty hard to hit, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, it's 2 gauge, 3 to 7, 3 power, 3 speed, 3 guard. So it'll tank through fast projectiles. It hits 3 to 7, so it's not like it's like a projectile itself. It won't hit at 1 or 2, and it gets stunned out by 4 speed, like dive ish, like
Yeah.
projectiles. But the hit effect is game winning.
Yeah.
Choose up to 3 cards from your discard pile and add them to your overdrive. And in addition, you get the top card, but they're both hit effects, so you get to choose the order.
Right.
So
So
you know,
you might be able to control what the top card is, or get the top card and then three more on top of it.
yeah,
Um, this seems like it is begging for an EX attack, just stat
begging
wise.
for an EX attack or light or
Yeah.
defend, or like saying your opponent can't play something. I wonder
Yeah.
how we do that.
Yeah.
Um, or things like that. Generally, what's going to happen with this is your opponent crosses out of something. They go to 5.
Right.
Or more likely, you want them at 6. They can't back up, and they can't move in far enough, and they don't have a thing that breaks it, and you can just throw this at them.
Right.
And so if you hit with this, you're getting 4 cards in your overdrive, and that in your gauge.
Right. And also,
It,
two of the cards that are going to be in your discard pile are from your gauge.
yes. So you can
So
just put them back.
yeah, you put them there if you wanted to, and you don't have anything else to put. If you have two great cards in your discard pile that you'd like to put into gauge, but two of them are already in your gauge, or that you'd like to put in your overdrive, but the others are in your gauge. Well, now they're all in your discard pile, so
Yeah.
you can put them in that way.
And now the thing to note is that this is one of the ways that you can actually play grasp and cross and focus and turn them into cards that you actually want to use.
Right.
Because you hit with cross and grasp, and now they're in your gauge. And then you play this, you pay both of them, and you get 3 other cards that you wanted that were not those cards.
That you preferred. Okay.
Yeah. Um. So like as I said, this card is game winning. You basically get 5 towards your goal. So it's effectively 3 towards your goal because you're paying 2, and it itself is a 3. So if you hit with this, you're set up for your permutation in R. You get to put whatever other cards you want into your overdrive, and you can check what cards are left in your deck so you know which cards you want.
Right.
And usually, the turn after you hit with this, you exceed, and that's basically the game itself. Like,
Right.
there's not a whole lot your opponent can do to stop you after that.
Right.
Um, Again, the card is not easy to hit, which is the problem. So you
Yeah.
need to
So
boost, and then your opponent needs to not see it coming, and you need to hit with it, or you need to read something, or something like that.
right. But is it strong enough that it's worth it to devote those resources to? Like having looked back through his kit, like we haven't really talked about the normal boosts or anything, and I'm sure we will in a second here. But like the effect, the hit effect on this seems like it is worth putting a light on.
Oh, absolutely. And
Okay.
really, like, a lot of his cards aren't worth putting boosts on the front
Yeah.
side, but that one is.
Yeah. And
Um,
then you have the light go into discard, but you could put that back in your overdrive.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh, this is a game-winning ultra. If you hit with this during a game, you're usually just gonna win off of that in general. It's not
Okay.
guaranteed, depending on the board state, but like realistically, you have whatever cards you want in your overdrive. You know what's left in your deck. You're probably going to exceed next turn. And you have an additional 3.
Right.
Usually that basically just says I'm going to win this game.
Right. 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 Okay.
Which is why it's kind of balanced by being hard to hit.
Hard to hit. Yeah. And then the boost is just a reposition to anywhere from the corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which which
But
is
that's good. I mean that's force efficient
yeah.
movement.
It's useful. A lot of the time what you want to do with this is you want to, if you're in the corner and like your opponent's like here,
Sure.
you want to go to 4 because now your disjoint union will put a 3 into your overdrive.
Right. And it's above curve.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, your disjoint union, if you think you, and both will put in your overdrive. Generally, you can just put yourself at any range where one of your specials will hit, and then you get to get out of the corner. You get to put this in your overdrive. You're not stuck getting beaten up.
Right.
It doesn't come up very often, but like it's useful.
Right. Okay. So that's the kit then. And
Uh
I feel like despite how complicated it is that like some skeleton of a game plan it has like I've got enough for that where it's like okay I want to exceed with specific things in my overdrive. And in order to kill my opponent, it's probably going to be stuff that lets me hit or me take an NR.
Yeah,
So use my various tools to get threes into my overdrive, and then just kill my opponent. Is like that seems like what the like all of these tools are leading toward that goal. Is that accurate?
that's pretty accurate.
Okay.
I will note something that I didn't note through this that is just kind of, I guess, not important, but I'm sure you've already talked with D, but D has
Sure.
a very particular way of playing Arakune, which I have like done maybe once or twice, but as a side note, like it's not capped at 8. If
I
for some
might
reason
sorry Faust to interrupt you. I might have lost you there for a second. I I dropped audio on my side. You were talking about D's
yes,
particular line of play on Arakune. Sorry about that.
yes. So D has a very particular way of playing Arakune, and it's a very fun way to do it, and it does work very well. Which is that his effect that puts cards into his overdrive.
Right.
There is no cap on the number of cards that can be in your overdrive. Um, you can have 15 cards in your overdrive if you want.
Right.
His exceed cost just costs 0. But let's say you get 12 cards in your overdrive and you exceed. Well, now you have 12 cards in your overdrive. Um, so you get a lot more turns of doing nonsense.
Right.
So like you don't have to exceed exactly when you're at 8. Now the problem is if you have 6 in here and 4 in here, you still only get 8 turns or 8 cards.
Right. It's slightly less efficient that way.
Yeah. So
Right.
like you actually have to put them in there. Usually
Right.
with F of G or F inverse or any other cards just put themselves in the overdrive.
Right.
So if you can comfortably just put, 10 to 11 cards in your overdrive during the course of a game and then exceed, you'll have a longer time to do your nonsense.
Right. Okay.
Which was not mentioned before. And I think he's the only character in the game that can actually have more cards in his overdrive than his exceed cost.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. That makes sense. And I mean like as you said, like that is an unconventional way to play this character, but it has real benefit.
It does work very well if you can do it. It's just can you do it before you die? And our
Right.
Arcana cannot always afford to do that. And
Right.
it does definitely feel like a very very D way of playing the game.
I was gonna say, yeah, it has his seal of approval on it. So
Uh huh.
when Arakune is on front side, he is trying to survive, right? He's
Yes.
trying to survive long enough to get his stuff in there. So his opponent is going to be pressuring him pretty heavily, and he's using his various dodge tools and some of his like less obviously impressive specials in order to diffuse difficult situations so that he can set up things like FFG and get his economy going.
Hmm.
Like in terms of and like we've talked a lot about uh gauge management and overdrive management. What is his like force economy like? Because like just looking at a force special and then uh two specials that have like a Rekka effect on them, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of card draw. So is his economy kind of just down to the fact that he's playing a slow paced game on front side, and so he's going to just be consistently drawing cards?
That's pretty accurate. A lot of the time, Arcane is not the one that's going to be initiating a strike, and if he
Right,
does, usually you want to end up in a situation where you're fine, or he knows he's going to win, and regardless of the outcome, it's worth striking.
right,
So
right,
the fact that you don't strike as much allows you to boost and draw cards and do whatever you want more.
right,
There are situations where he just gets to the point where he doesn't have any options, and that can happen a decent bit. But he doesn't really have too much trouble with card draw. In his exceed mode, he doesn't have any trouble at all. He gets to draw two when he exceeds. He also gets to look at the top card of his deck, so he's wild swinging a lot.
yep,
And he doesn't really ever completely run out of gas in exceed mode a lot. Maybe in the last turn or so, but generally you want to have five or 6 cards in your hand when you
Right.
exceed. You go to
Or
8 cards, you strike.
and hopefully by the end of that volley, your opponent's dead or close to it.
Yeah, and a lot of the time they run out of cards well before you finish your exceed mode, especially if you hit with like permutation and or sweep because you're pulling an extra card out of their hand.
Right, right.
Um,
Any sorry, if you were going to say something, I cut you off.
no, that's no. Go ahead.
I was going to ask so that's kind of some of the economy concerns. What about his normals we've talked about specifically in the context of like Spike becomes very good in exceed mode and also is very useful to cheat into your overdrive. Dive has a similar but maybe lesser utility. Um in terms of like evaluating his normals versus normal boosts, um light seems really good on FFG. You mentioned that a lot of his other stuff doesn't really have much need for boosts. Um, so like are his, he's so like how would you evaluate some of his normals and what to do with them?
So to consider normals, uh, the easiest normals to hit, in my opinion, are assault,
Yep,
grasp,
yep,
cross, and focus.
yep. I agree.
The problem is that grasp, cross, and focus don't do a whole lot in his exceed mode. Assault does. Fives are good for him. So just playing normal straight up that are good doesn't always work, and that's kind of the problem with Arakune is that so a lot of the tendencies that you get to with a strong normals game don't advance your game plan as much as you might want,
Right.
which usually means that those boosts on those cards are good to play just in general, or they're good to be the cards that you pay as force if you know you're not going to get them in your overdrive.
Right, but
Because
as soon as you reach kind of a critical mass of those cards in your overdrive, they start to become less and less valuable because you need something to pay with for the attacks
yeah,
as well. Okay.
and they also just don't become great attacks with themselves. Like grasp is speed 8, damage 5, which is feels like an ultra,
Right.
but comparatively to a lot of the other stuff he can do, it's not fantastic.
Yep.
Cross is speed 7, damage 5, but it brings you all the way back out. Um, Focus is a sweep. It's just a sweep with 2 armor.
Yep.
Um, and then like assault is good with itself, as I said. So it's speed 6, damage 6 advantage, which is really nice because
Yeah,
you get
that's
to
a
go
lot.
again.
Yeah,
And, yeah.
that's very good.
So then that leads to like cross to advance is good. You can get out of a corner, you can move in, you can do stuff. It also kind of is a get out of jail free card. You can play it when you're not going to hit, just to dodge an attack, and that's fine. It's not
Yep.
going to your overdrive or gauge, but like you don't really need it for that.
Right.
Grasp for power boost is also okay. It makes some of your threats a little better.
Right.
If a lot of your attacks are good with +2 power in your exceed mode, getting +2 power on not your exceed mode also makes them threatening.
Sure. That makes sense. I
Like
not to cut you off. It just clicked for me after all this time. Your specials and ultras have the hit effect on your front side. You don't get the top card of your discard pile in your overdrive when you hit with normals.
yeah,
That did not even click with me. Okay, so
yeah. If
I'm up with it now. Okay.
if he did hit with his normals and get a card into his overdrive, I truly believe that he would be one of the best characters in the game.
Yeah. So
I think
that's
he would be far too strong.
a mitigating factor that
Yes.
his opponents thank him for that. So you're getting even less benefit out of hitting with the normals. Um, even the normals that are that would be good in his overdrive. That you're not getting the extra economic boost from his specials and ultras.
Yes.
So that kind of even goes further into what you're saying, or
Mhm.
sort of adds even more credence to it. Yeah. All right. Sorry, that was me being slow. I'm
No,
back.
it's all good.
I'm back with the lesson now.
So then, so we went over grasp cross. Focus reading is really good on Arakune.
Mhm.
So like you can read into End to Infinity to win a game. You can read into Permutation in R or F of G to
To win
effectively win the game.
to win a game. Yeah.
Yeah. You can do some other stuff with reading to look at your opponent's hand and stuff. Like reading is very useful. It's very useful for pretty much every character, honestly.
Right.
But so focus as a boost is quite good. As an attack, it's also decent because it's very safe. Draws your card, gives you armor.
Right.
It,
But
it's not.
it's not giving you a ton for your overdrive.
Yeah, usually you're gonna play it because it's a good card, and then you just use it to pay for your overdrive at the start of your turn.
Right.
So then you have block. Block can't match with itself because it doesn't have power. It has speed. I guess you can have a fast block, but sure, okay.
Yeah. Thank
Um,
goodness.
uh, um, so parry is good. Block is good on its own. Again, having like one or two cards that are useless in your overdrive to you is fine because you just pay them at the start of your turn. Um, parry is useful. Especially again, you can look at their hand, you can parry the option that you can't beat. You can get rid of something else that's just problematic as a boost. You can parry their parry so they can't parry your F inverse or something.
Yep.
Uh, it's useful. You know, uh, so like a lot of the time, the cards that you don't want in your overdrive are going to be boosted. Sometimes they're going to be played on defense or offense because you just need that last gauge or you need something to play. But
Yep.
a lot of the time, they're boosts more often than you play them.
Okay.
And then you have the other cards. So that's assault, dive, and spike and sweep. Those are the ones that you're fine hitting with because they match up well with the rest of your kit. Sweep is good. Sweep is the sweep. It does 6 damage. It's very good at 1. It matches up with FPS wise. Like you can just play that card
Yep.
and not feel bad about it because you have this to come back and hit them for another 8, and that's 14 damage
Yep.
right there if you
Yep.
do that.
In two
Uh,
hits.
yeah, exactly. So that's pretty good. Light is also useful. It's good with FG. It can be good with other things depending on the situation, but like light speed is always good. Funny
Yeah.
enough, speed for your opponent is not always good because they can be faster than you.
Right. And you can speed dodge them.
Yeah, I've had I remember specifically in a tournament, I had a guile who boosted with swift destruction and then EX spiked me, and it was a speed 6 spike,
Yep.
and that doesn't really work.
Nope. That would have been really really great onto pretty much any other character.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So yeah,
That's sweep, and then assault, dive, spike were the other ones.
yeah. Assault's okay. Like hitting with assault is great. You get advantage. You get a speed 5.
Yep.
Boosting to retreat is also nice because Arakune actually has some decent ranged options. He's
Okay.
got Y2 dash, distant union, permutation R, and FPS wise can all hit at range. And then you have FG, which is just your projectile that wins you the game.
Yeah.
However, you're using an assault. The thing is that if you can hit with a special after you boost with the assault, it goes to your overdrive. So
Right.
like pretty good. It's also fantastic on your on your flip side because speed 6, damage 6, that gives you advantage. Um, and like I guess they play sweep or focus, and you're trading 6 for 6 and taking another turn and getting to play another card. So that's like the best case scenario for your opponent most of the time.
Right.
Um, then we have dive. Dive is okay. Like you need to get dives a lot of the time because Y2 dash. Um, and like dive with itself is also fine because range 3. It's a speed 5 that goes over your opponent and hits for 7.
Right.
So it dodges things, it breaks slows. It puts you back at 1, which is okay. I think Y2 dash is slightly better, but also dive can be better because YG Dash hits from 1 to 6, where Dive only hits at 3 and 4, and at 4 it can get traded back into with Focus.
Yeah.
Oh, I got excited. um, and then Tech is good. A lot of the time, the one thing that's going to stop you from defusing your opponent um, in on your front side is your opponent putting in a boost that you just can't deal with.
Yep.
And Tech will get you out of that situation, so it's
It's
quite useful.
it's your
Yeah.
diffusal option. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, you play Tech, it goes to your discard, you hit with a special, it goes to your overdrive.
Okay.
So it's nice. It's useful. Um, yeah. And then we have Spike. So Spike is the weird one.
Yep.
Spike is hard to hit. Generally, I mean, you can call your opponent out, but like it's not completely safe.
Yeah, but you
Uh,
don't need to call your opponent out when you're grasping them, right? Like
yeah,
that's why spike is strange.
yeah. It says you lose if you're slower than me most of the time, but
Right.
problem is it hits 2 and 3, and it's below curve at both of those options.
Yep.
Um, so hitting with spike is very good if you can do it, because generally it means that you're winning. You either get hit for 4 and hit for 5, or you just beat your opponent straight up and you get a 3 in your cage.
Right.
But the problem is that if you don't hit it, you have like 1 or 2 turns to hit your opponent with a special to put it in your overdrive,
Right.
or you have to hit with FG.
F of G, which as mentioned, you're probably winning the game anyway at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
So playing Spike as Arakune is very risky, but the payoff is not as good as you might think. You get a 3, which is very good. But you have several other ways to get 3s.
Right.
So there's that. The other thing is like you could boost with it. But the problem is a lot of the ways you have to cheat cards into your overdrive, you have to have them in your hand.
Right.
If Heathen Q does it, Permutation and R does it, F Piecewise does it, and you pay them to then put them in your overdrive. But you have to
Right.
pay them from either your gauge or your hand. So the boost is decent, it's armor and guard, but you don't have a lot of attacks that like guard through things that'll still hit. Like FP wise and permutation and R generally don't need more guard. Like sometimes it's worth it, but okay. If you think Q like doesn't really benefit that much, the only time it's going to benefit is if your opponent is initiating and they have a speed 5. That's generally the only benefit of this card of
Right.
boosting defend. Um, Disjoint Union can if your opponent has a speed 6 projectile that'll hit you and then you hit them back and stun them, but again, very specific. And Y2 dash is again very specific. It doesn't beat grasp or cross because they just put you in a spot where you can't hit them.
Where you can't hit them, sure.
So like it doesn't really do anything. The only time it would really be good is if they have a fast projectile that you want to tank through. So
Right.
like very, very specific things that don't really help you unless you can basically say, I know you're going to play this card.
Right.
And that can happen, but
And then if you whiff with any of those things, your copy of Spike is buried even deeper into your deck or into your discard pile
exactly.
rather. Yeah.
So it's like you don't really want to play Spike ever.
Right. Because
You
it's
want to
too
hold it
good.
in your hand. Yeah, you want to hold it in your hand to put it in your gauge or play it when you're in Exubode.
Right.
Or
Okay.
your overdrive, not your gauge. But yeah,
Right.
which is
Gotcha.
odd. Like it's a very weird way to think about it. It's usually a dead card, honestly, until you exceed. You use it as force, but you don't use it as force because it's necessarily a bad card. You use it as force because it's a good card.
Right. Because then it's going into your overdrive somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
This didn't come up. I forgot to ask this when we were talking about economy, but because we mentioned it, when you are doing economic concerns like big change cards or move actions or things like that with Arakune, I'm assuming that you prefer to spend from your hand because your gauge is so crucial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually, the only time you really ever spend with your gauge is if you already know you're going to have enough to exceed.
Right.
Um. Or like you think you're going to put that card right back on top after you do it.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Sorry for that little sidebar. I just
Yeah.
forgot to ask that. Okay.
The other thing is that and not every character does this again, but Arakune is very, very, very important to be able to track your discard order.
Yes.
And that's an extra step to the game that some people don't want to deal with because, like you have to track cards in your hand, you have to track cards in your opponent's hand, your opponent's discard, your gauge, your overdrive, your deck, everything.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of moving parts.
Yep. Yeah. And I
Which,
mean, and that is this character, right? Like everything he's
mhm.
doing is a bunch of moving parts.
And that's also one of the reasons there's rules in place for characters like Arakune, where you can't change the order of your discard.
Right.
Which is important to note because sometimes people just like it doesn't matter for most characters. So sometimes people will rearrange it to like figure out what's left,
Yep.
but you can't do
Yeah.
that, and
You
you got to
can't do that
remember
with
that.
him. Yep. All right. Yeah. That's definitely good to remember. So
Yeah.
any other kind of like gameplay or game plan tips that you'd like to share while we're at this part of the lesson?
Yeah. So, um, actually, let's see. What other things are we gonna go over after this, so I don't,
So
repeat ourselves?
the only other question that I have after this is what your opponent's doing to stop Arakune
Mm,
and how you can kind of counter their counterplay. So anything else
yeah.
about about the kit itself or the character itself is, I would say, at this point, your open season.
Okay. So, something I would just like to note, I suppose, is that uh, I guess this actually goes into playing against Arcanist. So let's just move into that for now.
All right, sure.
All right. So, there is a very easy way to make Aracune uncomfortable. Um, and it's not always obvious, but like it's very easy to do. And that is to do this. Is to sit at range 2 and stare at him.
Okay.
Because you want to tell me which of his attacks works at range 2?
Yeah, I guess it's a more expensive F piece wise or
Uh
cross.
yeah, and he doesn't really want to hit with crosses as much.
Right, exactly.
You can also play Y2 dash, but it's a weird mid speed.
Yeah, it's risky. And it's risky
So
and doesn't really actually have that much upside.
yeah, I mean
Yeah,
you might do 6 and you get an overdrive, which is okay. Like it's
right.
it's not bad, but it's that means you're not using it on your Xyz mode.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
so like if you have a character like Ryu that can just consistently stand at range 2 and threaten him, he has a hard time dealing with that,
Okay.
which is funny for a character so complex that
Right.
his weakness is to stand at range 2.
Yeah, Arakune's over here like doing the floating numbers math meme of like just solving all these equations and your opponent is just like happily standing at range 2.
Yeah. Good old range 2. Nothing beats
And
that.
nothing beats that. Okay. So very simple counterplay, but maybe not actually easy to achieve because of, not every character can do it as consistently as Ryu, for example,
Yeah.
or things deposition you. You have to go back there.
Yeah. The other counterplay to Arcune is it's funny. You want to be on one side of the spectrum when it comes to your game plan. You either want to be extremely aggressive or you want to be extremely patient.
Right.
Because while Arakune can eventually just sit there and get free overdrive engage by not ever attacking you, it's hard to get it all the way up without him going through his entire deck and having to reshuffle and risking decking out because he didn't do any damage to you.
Right.
Um, so if you're patient and you just force him to not hit and lose his resources and diffuse his setups, he just kind of falls apart eventually because he can't get all the cards he needs and he doesn't do any damage to you at the start of the game. So like he has to do all his damage in Exceed mode, and
Right.
then if he goes out of Exceed mode, he doesn't have the time to go back into it, and he just kind of loses. So
Have you ever exceeded twice in a game with Arakune?
I have. I think I've done it maybe twice out of probably 100 games played.
Right.
It's
So
very rare.
not common and probably not an ideal situation.
Usually, what ends up happening that you exceed twice is that your first exceed mode you hit 4 or 5 times, and those cards go to your gauge, and then you only need 3 more gauge to exceed, and you
Right.
just boost with F inverse and hit with something.
Right. It's not as difficult to climb the second time around.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So, like, generally, you're either dead or your opponent is dead by the time your exceed mode ends.
Right.
Uh, the first time. And that's it's like he's having a power up arc. You got to kill him before he gets there.
Right, definitely. And so
Which
when he is exceeded, his opponent, like if Arakune is at an extreme life deficit and he's exceeded, his opponent could just kill him through it. But
yeah, and that
it,
that has happened before.
sure,
It's not unlikely.
right. But it seems like most of the time when he's exceeded, if he's not at a big life deficit, his opponent needs to like run away or something, right?
Funny enough, running away doesn't work that well. Yeah, I mean, permutation on R almost hits the whole board. F
Oh,
piece
true.
wise hits 1 to 6. YG dash hits 1 to 6. Disjoint union hits 1 to 4. Um, like he can play an FFG and hit you and refresh his overdrive. Like running away doesn't work as well as you might think.
Right.
Generally, the best way to stop Arcane from casting out on the succeed mode is just to boost into him on your turn and make his options slightly worse.
Should at least make him have a mix-up rather than
Yeah,
just beat you for free 4 times.
exactly.
Okay.
Um, and like not every character can do that because not every character has good stat boosts.
Yep.
I mean, like if you're playing against like King Knight, Ryu, most of season 3 actually has good boosts that can do that. There are a few specific characters in other seasons that can. Um, like they can just boost a light. And now he's slightly uncomfortable because most of his cards that are good, like R2 Dash, and like some of the normals that don't have guard, now can get beaten because he's got +1 speed and you've got +2 speed.
Right.
You can boost defend, and now your sweep doesn't get stunned. You can boost with I don't know, power, and now your speed 5 can beat his permutation in R because it breaks it.
Right.
Like
So
don't
you very rarely could like shut down everything he could do, but you can at
yeah.
least like limit his options and then play around the ones that he's probably playing in return.
Yeah, and the best thing that can happen is you boost something. Arakune cannot play a card into you because it's too risky, and he has to do something else with his turn, and he burns an overdrive.
Right. Sure.
Um, yeah.
Okay.
Uh, so that's kind of how you wanted to do that. A lot of the time when he's in exceed mode, you just have to accept you're going to lose,
Yeah.
or at least lose light. You're going to trade down. Um, if you manage to trade up when he's in overdrive, good for you. It's very rare, and
Right.
like you usually you have to play an EX or catch him with something that he's not expecting or whatever. Um, a lot of the time he's going to be at a life deficit anyway. So just like if you're taking 8 and he's taking 4 and he's at 10 life, you probably still kill him before he kills you.
Right.
Um,
And it's pretty common because of how frail's the wrong word because of how non-threatening Arakune can be on front side. Your opponent is plenty threatening. Uh,
yeah,
they can probably whittle you down pretty well
yeah,
before you can exceed. So you likely are exceeding at a life deficit.
yeah. If you can exceed a life positive, you basically already won the game.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Uh, so let's see what else. Oh yeah, on the other side, so be defensive and on your front when he's on the front side. Don't let him get his free resources, and beat his options when you can. And then on the flip side, you just play cards and rush him down
Yep.
because well he
Because
has time to
he can't do that much to stop your game plan other than diffuse your specific options with dodges and things.
yeah, and like he has to take turns to do that and resources and stuff. And if your character's like aggressive like Jin or Ragna or like a grappler and just gets on top of him and doesn't let him get a chance to get some air, he will fall apart.
Yeah.
A lot of the time when you do that though, he will still exceed because he's just trading back into you or playing cards that might beat you sometimes.
Right, but
Um,
he doesn't necessarily have he doesn't have like the perfectly curated overdrive that he would if you gave him time.
exactly.
Gotcha.
And the worst thing to do is give him the middle ground because the middle ground he has time to curate his overdrive, and he strikes into and you're striking, so he's getting gauge. So like generally he'll be at a slightly lowered life than you would have if you played safe, but his overdrive is strong enough that he can finish you off a lot of the
Right.
time, and he'll be at a
So either out like dedicate yourself fully to out neutraling, out defending him, or you know rush him down into the dirt.
yeah
Don't play mid range.
um um yeah, and the problem that comes up with that is it's just matchup specific. Like
Yeah.
some characters want to play the mid game, and they can't play the either one of the other ones, and it's very hard for them to do that. And they are just kind of a bad match for Arakune. Some characters can do both, like Ryu. Ryu can do both, and he's a very good matchup into Arakune.
Right.
One character can do one or the other, and they have an okay matchup into him, depending on how well both characters draw. Um, so it you can kind of figure out what's going to happen before a game starts if both people are at equal skill level, depending on characters a lot of the time.
Right.
The one thing I will note, and this is just a weird, I don't know if it's weird, but I have never lost a game as Arakune against anyone playing a season 6 character, uh, other than Carmine, but that's because no one here plays Carmine.
Right, and
Um,
Carmine has it. There's a caveat next to most losses to Carmine.
yeah,
Yeah,
which generally is season 6 characters are either very aggressive, but they don't have the ability to stay aggressive for that long,
yep,
or they have the ways to diffuse things, but they don't have any way to boost stats, so they can't survive his Exceed mode pretty much ever.
right.
Um, so they just kind of lose in one direction really quickly, um, which is unfortunate. Like they're decent against characters like that don't have that button that turns them into a monster. But I would love for someone to prove me wrong that one of these seasons these characters is a good matchup into Arakune because I, I always want to be challenged.
Right.
But generally, when I sit down at a table and my in a tournament and my opponent puts a season 6 character down to play against me and I'm playing Arakune, I feel very comfortable that I can win the game.
Okay.
Um,
They just don't have the toolkit, so that isn't down to the specific counterplay that they're doing, or if it is, you don't know what it is. It's just down to the kit shape. They just don't
yeah,
have the tools to contest Arakune.
yeah. And on the flip side, Arakune has a rough time into season 3. Season 3 has a lot of good boosts.
Yep.
The characters can be aggressive. The characters can be defensive. They have a very good way to deal with him when he's in Exceed mode. And it's a lot harder to win games against those types of characters because they do have the tools to deal with it. Um, yeah, I think probably the most challenging matchup I've ever had is Bison. We have a very prominent Bison player,
Mm.
and Bison has a lot of good stuff to deal with him. If you're
Okay.
looking for a character to beat him,
Maybe look at Bison. That makes sense.
yeah,
Okay.
uh,
Those things, like, but the some of the tips that you're giving about how to deal with Arakune's stuff, like standing at range 2 and consistently standing at range 2. Obviously there are some characters who can do that better, but
yes,
like some of these tips are kind of matchup agnostic of just things that he has difficulty dealing with.
exactly. Like,
Okay.
there are some characters that just don't have any attacks other than normal that actually hit at range 2.
Yeah.
And then the problem is if you stand at range 2, you're bad too.
Right. Right.
Um, it's very matchup dependent, which is kind of indicative of a fighting game in general, right? Like,
Sure,
you
sure.
know,
Yeah,
it, it,
like Zangief is gonna have trouble going into Dalsim.
yep.
Yeah.
Or like you're playing Ryu and your opponent's all projectiles, but your Hadoken beats all of their projectiles.
Right.
So
You're doing fine, even if you're not normally a dedicated zoner. For this matchup, you can be.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and that's kind of some tips and stuff. I think that overall, I have put a lot of time into this game and played almost every character a decent bit.
Hmm.
And I think Arakune is one of the few that is worth putting a lot of time into to get to that higher skill ceiling. Like every character can beat every other character in at the end of the day. Like your skill can make a character that has a bad matchup beat a character that has a good matchup.
Sure.
But every character has a point at which, regardless of your skill level, they can't get any better. And I think that Arakune has one of the highest like skill ceilings of most of the characters in the game with all of the little mechanics and nonsense that he can do.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think that his skill ceiling is higher than certain characters, but I think that it's up there to the point where he is definitely worth putting the time into if you really like him and you like complex characters.
Yeah.
Um, whereas there are characters that are can beat him and are probably as good or better than him that don't require as much
That are also
investment.
easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if you don't have time to dedicate, days or hours to learning Exceed and you want to play a character that's fun and good, Arcanine might not be the character for you.
Right.
Um, and that's fine. Like everybody plays what they like,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. And if you are, if somebody listening to this or watching this is like Faust and wants to uh express themselves through a character that allows them to reach a very high skill ceiling with a lot of work. Again, honestly, very fighting game like there are some characters who are just very, very technical,
mhm.
who reward the kind of lab monster mentality. Um, which, and in that case, maybe pick up Arakune or give him a try.
Yeah. It's kind of a funny phenomenon that a lot of the characters that are originally take a lot of skill, or like time just in general to master or play well, are not seen as that great when like the seasons first come out.
Right.
I remember when Shovel Knight, like the OG, just Shovel Knight came
Yep.
out, and people thought he was one of the worst characters in the game.
Yep.
But then like people learned how to play him, and he turned out to be one of the best.
Yep.
And I'm aware that on the in the online community, at least, or in the one that I'm in the circles around, Arakune is not particularly seen as a very good character. But in the in-person store community that I'm at, that I run in my local area, um, Arakune is the most banned character in our community
Yeah.
because people just have issues dealing with him.
Because they have a dangerous Arakune in their midst, and they have to know how to deal with it, and they might not.
Yeah. So, you know, play what you like, and he's definitely a character that if you like complex stuff, and you like wacky nonsense, and you like going Super Saiyan and just making your opponent explode, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I would also, before we get off, I think it's in this module. I hope it is. Hold on. Uh, nope, that's not it. Hold on.
Getting into alters here.
Yes, I think it was Alex or Moriarty that made an altar that he gave me in person, and it's one of my favorites. Let's see. Yes, this one. Okay, so can you do me a favor? And this is just, can you say this guy's name with a Canadian accent?
I'm doing the thing where I take my glasses off and rub my eyes again. Faust, are you referring to Arakune? Yeah, yeah.
It's wonderful,
I'm
and I would like
so
to thank Alex for giving me this.
I'm so mad. You're lucky that you're an excellent teacher, Faust. So I'm gonna have you on the show more often because you're on thin ice with this raccoon.
It gets better. There's multiple
Oh
raccoons.
my god. That's actually really cute. I can't even front. I like puns a lot more than I pretend to, and that's actually very funny. Right. I'm gonna go yell at Moriarty for this.
Yeah,
But and he'll know that he deserves it. But Faust, seriously, especially for such a complicated character, thank you for your time and expertise. Always really enjoyable talking to you, but specifically for a character who requires this much guidance, it is really really great to have a really great guide. So thank you so much.
yeah, absolutely. And if people want to reach out to me sometime to either play some games or get some tips or whatever, I'm around most places.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody who's watching, thank you all so much for your time and your attention. Please try out Arakune. You too can have the headache that I have now trying to understand him. Good luck with your games, and thank you guys so much for watching. And I'll talk to y'all later. Bye, everybody.